Hi there, my name is Vidusha, and today we'll be covering glacial landforms and the formation of corries in particular. We'll also dive a bit deeper and look at the key processes involved in the formation of these glacial landscapes. Now, I've added a nice little picture here, just so you have a reference to what we're talking about, and so you can go back and refer everything to this picture. And it also help explain a bit more about what's going on in these wild landscapes. So before we move on, we need to understand the key mechanisms in which quarries and other glacial landscapes are formed by. Does anyone know or has anyone heard of any of these mechanisms? Great, exactly. So the two main types are weathering and erosion. Now, this can be split a bit more into three different processes, and that's what we'll cover in a bit more detail. So the first is abrasion. Now I've highlighted all these terms in red because they're very important terms, and you should go back and try to define them yourself and make sure that you understand what these terms mean. So if we focus on abrasion firstly, this is basically the sandpaper effect that rocks have upon the bedrock or the landscape. Now, as you can imagine, rocks aren't the smoothest of things, and eventually the back and forth motion and rubbing motion that rocks do have causes things to wear down. And this is the same example on the side of a mountain or in a river. The the back and forth motion, a bit like a sandpaper, if you've got two pieces of sandpaper together and you rub them back and forth, eventually they'll become smooth or wear away. And that's the same principle here. Now, due to the sandpapering effect that abrasion has, it will leave little scratches in the landscape, and these are called striations. Okay, striations, and all these are just little lines or little scratches in the landscape that have been left behind due to the rocks themselves or other debris wearing away at the landscape. Now, moving on to another form of erosion, plucking. Now, I think the best way to understand plucking is by seeing it in action. So maybe in your spare time, if you get a small pebble and when you fill up some water in the ice tray, you put that pebble in and let it freeze. And once the ice cubes form, take it out and try to pull the rock out. You'll find that it's very difficult to, and if not, quite impossible. That's because the ice has made a nice seal around the rock or the pebble and has made it a lot harder to take it out. And this is the same principle in plucking. The ice or here will have formed a nice little seal around the the wall or the rock, and due to the force of gravity, it will cause it to pull away or pluck it from the landscape, forming smaller rocks or smaller debris, and also wearing away at the landscape. So that's erosion, and those are the two main types of erosion in these glacial landscapes that occur. Now, if we move on to weathering, weathering only really has one thing we should consider, and that's called freeze-thaw weathering. Now, there's a fun fact here. Water, when it freezes, expands by 9%. And that may not seem a lot, but when they're in small little cracks in the rock, it can exert a lot of pressure. And once again, we'll go back to the whole ice cube tray. When you fill an ice cube tray with water, you put it in the freezer, and eventually when you take it out, you realize that it's kind of gone up a level and that's because the ice is expanded. So imagine the water itself going down into small little cracks during the day when the temperatures are a bit warmer and the ice has melted. into these little cracks in the landscape. Now, as night approaches, the temperatures will then drop again, causing the ice to melt, right? And as the ice, sorry, causing the ice to freeze. And as the ice freezes, it expands and exerts a lot of pressure on the rock here and here, right? And this pressure eventually causes the rock to break away from the landscape and form smaller chunks. So I hope that's clear. And as I mentioned, the terms in red are the terms you kind of need to remember. Those are the important ones. And that's a lot of information. So take your time to process it all. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Great. Now let's put this all together and think about it in a whole process. So this is depicting the side of a mountain. Okay. Now, normally during the winter, it will snow high up in the mountains, and this snow will then accumulate in the side of the mountain in a hollow. And as more and more snow falls, it will become compressed due to the weight of the snow. A bit like if you have a snowball and you get some fresh snow, compact it, it makes it a lot denser. And that's the same principle when snow piles on top. And as this compresses down, it gains weight. And due to the force of gravity, there's pressure placed coming down. Okay? So imagine it's snowed quite a bit. Okay? And the ice is compressed here. Due to gravity, it will cause the ice to come down, to move down slowly, and eventually it will go forward until it reaches the end of the ditch or the hollow. Okay, and this will form like a circular motion, right? And that is what we call rotational slip. Okay, so rotational, sorry, my handwriting is not the best. Rotational slip. Okay, now this is a key process, that's why I put it in red. And that's just simply the process of gravity playing its part and forcing the ice and all the debris in the ice to move down in a circular motion towards the end and towards the shallower end of the hollow. Now, as you can see, we've also got this other processes of erosion and weathering. So this here is your freeze-thaw weathering, and that will cause a steeper wall. Okay, will cause this section of rock to fall in to the ice. Okay, and this will cause eventually a steeper back wall. Now you've got a plucking here that occurs, as well as the abrasion, and eventually that will cause the hole to deepen. Okay, and now we've got the basics of a quarry. Now, due to rotational slip, the ice will move in this direction and eventually come to the shallower end, otherwise known as the quarry lip. And this, once the ice is melted, it will leave all these debris into a little mound, and we call that moraine. Okay, M-O-R-R-A-I-N-E, moraine. It's just a fancier word of saying debris. Okay, and that is the basic principle of how a quarry is formed. Eventually, the ice will melt and form a lake, and that's called a tarn. So going back to the picture. Oh, sorry. Going back to the picture on the first slide, you can see this is a quarry lake, otherwise known as a tarn. That's been a very quick overview of the formation of quarry. If you have any questions, please let me know and I'll try to answer them as best as possible. But thank you very much for listening and I hope you've learned a lot.